it's interesting too, the Agenda 20, everything's getting rammed down our throats right now, while most folk are distracted with Libya and that kind of stuff and the meltdowns. Most in Canada, you don't even know there's a meltdown going on, I think. But anyway, things that really, the usual things that occupy their minds, like I say, Celine Dion being pestered by some doctor, that's front page news, and that's good enough for the people in mushroom world, I suppose. But the local Agenda 21, also called the Millennium Project, by the way, from the United Nations, and it really is based on the Communist Manifesto, because Karl Marx talked about a united Americas, and then a united Europe, and a united Far Eastern conglomerate too. They went into, he touched on even an Africa possibly, which might even be amalgamated eventually into the greater mainland and stuff like that. So we're living through all of this happening as they amalgamates all their plundered countries in the Middle East as well. And they'll keep them all fighting each other internally for a while too, while the big monopolies go in with their private mercenary troops and just plunder the oil, no taxes to pay, nothing like they're doing with Iraq. But Agenda 21 goes on, and you would understand the Communist Manifesto, as I've mentioned many, many times before, to do with the end of marriage. That's almost here now. I think it's pretty lucky for most people. And again, too, no private property was to be another one down the road to tax you out of it. And it also eventually touches on transportation. Understand, in all Sovietized countries, you needed a special permit to leave those countries. Even if you're in a higher occupation in the Politburo, you had to have a pass to come and go across borders. They love borders, actually, even though they call it one big USSR bloc at that time during the Cold War. And so the restriction of travel is really important for a controlled society. And this article here is from the Sovereign Independent, and it talks about what they're doing now. It says, in the usual BBC fashion, the BBC are getting us used to the idea of cars being a thing of the past. And I said that in one of the first shows I was on back in the 90s. And because I said, for some reason, I've never ever upgraded the internal combustion engine. Everything else is going up exponentially in advance, electronics and so on. But no, the same old engine, so they don't plan to have us driving in the future. I knew that then, when I was a small boy, you know. Anyway, it says, of course, they say that they reject the idea of banning cars in central London, but of course they have to plant the idea of no cars into our skulls so that at a later stage they can take it to the next stage in the usual incremental way. We wouldn't even bother considering the ludicrous idea otherwise, but we have to be trained like Pavlovian dogs or Skinnerian pigeons to accept this nonsense, and it has to start somewhere. The internal combustion engine is carbon bad, unless you're one of the inbred psychopathic elites, of course. We are to be herded off the rural areas and stuffed into the already overcrowded cities so we can be exterminated in the H.G. Wellsian fashion. And that's true, I've mentioned, and it's good that even this paper's picked up on the books I've mentioned about Wells and so on. Because Wells was a front man for the group that eventually was called Royal Institute for International Affairs, and he also belonged to another branch of that group called the Fabian Society. And we know that the co-founders, his other co-founders, George Bernard Shaw, for instance, and it's up on YouTube, I've given it over a few times, where you can hear him and see him, Mr. Shaw, talking about bringing out a nice gas, if the scientists would create a nice gas, humane gas, of course, to kill off the public, the ones that were unfit to live, and stuff like that. You know, lovely bunch of people. But when you see who their masters are, you're not surprised about the incredible arrogance of them, and they truly do believe they are the most evolved species on the planet. But what Wells actually said in A Modern Utopia was, a true objection to slavery is not that it's just unjust to the inferior. That's their point of view. There's only one sane and logical thing to be done with an inferior race, and that's to exterminate them. Now, there are various ways of exterminating a race, and most of them are cruel. You may end it with fire and sword after the old Hebrew fashion, or you may enslave it and work it to death, as the Spaniards did with the Caribs. You may set its boundaries and then poison it slowly with deleterious commodities, as the Americans do with most of their Indians. You may incite it to wear clothing to which it is not accustomed, and to live under new and strange conditions that would expose it to infectious diseases to which you yourself are immune, as the missionaries do with the Polynesians. You may resort to honest simple murder, as we English did with the Tasmanians, or you can maintain such conditions as conduce to race suicide, as the British administration does in Fiji. Suppose then for a moment that there is an all-round inferior race. A modern utopia is under the hard logic of life, and it would have to exterminate such a race as quickly as it could. So for all you in Britain and elsewhere who are now in the lower classes, including the middle ones who've fallen down the bottom through the holes in the mortgages and through the houses, he's talking about you see. And it says here, it goes on to talk about, it says about the internal combustion engine is to be phased out. Now that is true. There's other articles out on it too about the phasing out of the internal combustion engine, and the United Nations has also put articles on it about it as well. And it's definitely going to come about, because in Agenda 21 it says there will be no privately owned vehicles. It will be essential vehicles only. That's VIPs again, very important people, and police, military, ambulance maybe, and that'll be it pretty well, I think, pretty well. So I'll put up these links as well.